Hello there, welcome to Planet America's Situation Room. I'm John Barron.
I'm Licciardello, and we certainly have a situation.
New threats from President Trump against Iran. Now he says Iran has 48 hours before, quote, all hell will rain down on them.
Open the fucking strait, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell.
The American president dropping more F-bombs among the real bombs, veering from warmonger to peacemaker in just a matter of words.
And with the Iran war at a potential crossroads, how is it impacting the other war in Ukraine? But first,
it was the kind of week where a quote attributed to the American humorist Mark Twain sprang to mind. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And over the last 7 days, the world watched as astronauts, engineers and scientists again reached for the moon, and a president looked for ways to end an unpopular war that, once again, proved America's military might cannot easily defeat a weaker but determined foe. Instead of Lyndon Johnson or Richard Nixon addressing the nation from the White House as US troops were mired in Vietnam, this week it was Donald Trump.
Let me begin by congratulating the team at NASA and our brave astronauts on the successful launch of Artemis 2. It was quite something.
Indeed, it was quite something, but he did not dwell on that for very long. Trump's primetime speech was notable as much for what he did not say as what he did. There was no indication that he's considering deploying US ground forces in Iran. And he said that the US would keep an eye on Iran's enriched uranium stocks.
The nuclear sites that we obliterated with the B-2 bombers have been hit so hard that it would take months to get near the nuclear dust, and we have it under intense satellite surveillance and control.
So again, without saying it overtly, that suggested that he's not about to send special forces in to try and grab that dust. But it seems that Trump is still planning on doing some more damage as he heads for the exits.
We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong.
And if that sounded familiar, you're right. Probably an inadvertent reference to General Curtis LeMay, the former US Air Force chief who reputedly said in 1968 that instead of negotiating with North Vietnam, America should bomb them back into the Stone Age. And Chaz, we saw how that worked out.
yeah, Trump might be getting a bit of a head start on committing some of those war crimes, John. Just a few days ago, Trump posted a video of the supposedly biggest bridge in Iran being blown up while writing, "The biggest bridge in Iran comes tumbling down, never to be used again. Much more to follow." Now, I'm not a big fan of taunting countries while you're blowing up their civilian infrastructure, but what Trump didn't mention there was that they reportedly struck the bridge twice, roughly an hour apart, which means the second strike occurred when emergency responders were out there assisting the wounded. That's called a double tap strike, and if that's what happened, then that's a war crime. And if you think I'm being a little bit dramatic there, can I remind you that a week ago, Trump threatened to blow up and completely obliterate all of Iran's electric generating plants, all their oil wells and Karg Island, and possibly all their desalination plants, i.e. their drinking water. Then on Easter Saturday, Trump wrote, "Make a deal or open up the Hormuz Strait. Time is running out. 48 hours before all hell will rain down on them. Glory be to God." And then on Easter Sunday, he topped that tweet off with,
"Tuesday will be power plant day and bricks day all wrapped up in one in Iran. There'll be nothing like it. Open the fucking strait, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just to watch. Praise be to Allah."
Now, John, maybe I've got this all wrong, but isn't threatening violence against civilians and civilian infrastructure in the pursuit of political causes kind of the very definition of terrorism? Kind of. I'm not even getting into the swearing and the mocking of Islam on Easter Sunday here. I'm just talking about the terrorism bit. I just feel like sometimes we need to just stop and say, that there? That's not funny. That's just unacceptable from anyone, especially the president. And I might add that it also seems ineffective, much like that bombing you referred to before in Vietnam.
Yes, indeed. And speaking of history, President Trump was very keen in his speech this week to remind Americans that this has only been a comparatively short war.
American involvement in World War I lasted 1 year, 7 months, and 5 days. World War II lasted for 3 years, 8 months, and 25 days. The Korean War lasted for 3 years, 1 month, and 2 days. The Vietnam War lasted for 19 years, 5 months, and 29 days.
Thank you, Professor. But a quick fact check on that. US combat forces arrived in Vietnam in March of 1965. The last of them left in March of 1973. So really it was just 8 years and 3 weeks. But do go on, Mr. President. It seems like you're about to make a point.
Iraq went on for 8 years, 8 months, and 28 days. We are in this military operation, so powerful, so brilliant, against one of the most powerful countries for 32 days.
32 days. OK. Point made. This war hasn't gone on for that long. But curiously, President Trump skipped over America's longest war in Afghanistan, which lasted close to 20 years. Maybe because he failed to end it during his first term, but he did set a timetable to withdraw under Joe Biden. Speaking of which...
Thanks to the progress we've made, I can say tonight that we are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks.
So not a specific deadline, but another big hint that Trump is getting ready to bunk out, tipping his hand to the Iranians just as he did the Taliban. Just wait us out, despite having repeatedly said this kind of thing since the day he launched the war.
When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take.
32 days later, Trump denies that was ever even a war aim, while literally then in the same breath claiming it's actually been achieved.
Regime change was not our goal. We never said regime change, but regime change has occurred because of all of their original leaders' death.
It's a bit confusing though, John, that Trump keeps referring to this new regime, like for instance when he tweeted the USA is in serious discussions with a new and more reasonable regime to end our military operations in Iran. Great progress has been made. That sounded very positive until, of course, he threatened this reasonable new regime with war crimes a few lines later. Anyway, things seemed even more positive 2 days later when Trump tweeted, Iran's new regime president, much less radicalised and far more intelligent than his predecessors, has just asked the United States for a ceasefire. But unfortunately, Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson called Trump's claim false and baseless, and no one can seem to work out who these mysterious people in the new regime are that Trump is referring to. Even the American intelligence agencies say that the Iranian government is not currently willing to engage in substantial negotiations about ending the war. In fact, they don't trust America at all and don't think Trump is serious about negotiations. I can't imagine why they'd think that.
Open the fucking strait, you crazy bastard, or you'll be living in hell!
That's confusing as well. Also confusing is why this war started in the first place. As John said, Trump denied it was to effect regime change. Well, another reason we were given for the war early on was to stop Iran building a nuclear bomb. But if we take one more look at that nuclear dust grab that John played earlier, Trump clearly stated there is no nuclear threat.
The nuclear sites that we obliterated with the B-2 bombers have been hit so hard that it would take months to get near the nuclear dust, and we have it under intense satellite surveillance and control.
But doesn't that mean there wasn't a nuclear threat before the war as well? Also confusing is Trump's attitude towards the Strait of Hormuz being blocked off. A few days ago, he said that
We'll be leaving very soon, and if France or some other country wants to get oil or gas, they'll go up through the Strait and Hormuz Strait. They'll go right up there and they'll be able to fend for themselves. I think it'll be very safe, actually, but we have nothing to do with that. What happens in the Strait, we're not going to have anything to do with it.
America has nothing to do with the Strait. They'll just go, they'll let the Europeans do whatever they want with it. During the speech on Wednesday, Trump was even more relaxed about the Strait.
And in any event, when this conflict is over, the Strait will open up naturally. It'll just open up naturally.
Oh, it'll take care of itself. Don't worry. That might have been the exact moment on that dotted line on the graph there that the oil prices shot up about $7 a barrel. But hey, chill out, man. It's all good. And yet, a few days later, Trump's attitude towards the Strait had, well, evolved slightly.
Open the fucking Strait, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell!
Confusing and low energy and kind of pointless. That is, the speech, not the tweet. The tweet was very high energy, but the speech was not well received. Even Trump's advisors and administration officials and Washington allies and Mar-a-Lago buddies all went off the record to Zateo to pan the speech. One administration official even said to them, "It reminded me of listening to Joe Biden speak." Wow. Either way, though, Trump clearly wants to end this war. The problem is, Iran might not agree. If you look at the number of daily missiles fired by Iran over the last 2 weeks, it started to trend back up. And according to American intelligence assessments, even now, about half of Iran's missile launchers and one-way attack drones are still operational. Now, to be clear, that might include some missile launchers that are currently inaccessible because they're buried under rubble, even if they haven't been destroyed. But importantly, a large percentage of Iran's cruise missiles that can be used to create havoc in the Strait of Hormuz are still intact. And Iran are still fighting back, as evidenced by this weekend when Iran shot down an American fighter jet, creating an anxious few days where America was searching for that pilot who bailed out of the plane. They did, by the way, end up finding him and rescuing him, but at the same time, another US warplane crashed near the Strait of Hormuz. We don't know if it was shot down or not. And also during the rescue operation, a Black Hawk helicopter was also shot by Iranian ground fire, although that also escaped safely. My point is, Iran doesn't seem like it wants to end the war, John, and they get a vote.
Yeah, they certainly do. And that special operation to rescue the American airmen is the other piece of history rhyming this week. Donald Trump is old enough to remember Operation Eagle Claw back in April of 1980. It was a failed mission to rescue 52 American hostages being held at the US Embassy in Tehran. That failed operation that ended up with helicopters burning in the fields of Iran helped Jimmy Carter's presidency really effectively come to an end. It certainly clouded his legacy as president. The question now is, will this comparative success for Trump inspire thoughts of a raid to snatch Iran's enriched uranium after all? I guess we just have to watch this space.
We do. Finally, John, you said the most notable bits of Trump's speech might be what he didn't say. Well, I have one more item to add to that list. Trump has been getting very angry at NATO for the last couple of weeks for not helping out as much as he'd like in the war. In fact, Trump told Reuters he was absolutely considering withdrawing America from NATO. They haven't been friends when we needed them, Trump said. It's a one-way street. Now, that's not true. See the war in Afghanistan, for example. But regardless, the writing was on the wall for NATO in this speech. Administration sources told Politico just before the speech that Trump intended to harshly scapegoat NATO allies for Iran's ongoing restrictions in the Strait of Hormuz. And Trump himself told Reuters that one element of his speech would be to express his disgust with NATO for what he called their lack of support for American objectives in Iran. Yet, John, when Trump eventually did deliver that final speech, there was no critique of NATO. He didn't even mention the word NATO. He only mentioned Europe once in a completely different context. So I reckon someone talked Trump down at the last second. I don't know who, but whoever it is, Europe owes them a cold one.
Yeah, he probably just tinkered with the auto cue and didn't tell him. The US and Israeli war on Iran may have one clear winner and one clear loser, the winner being Russia and Ukraine, potentially the loser. The US lifted sanctions on Russian oil a couple of weeks ago, giving them a major new source of revenue as the oil price soared internationally. Meanwhile, the Pentagon is reportedly considering whether to divert weapons intended for Ukraine to the Middle East as the war in Iran depletes some of the US military's most critical munitions. And the refusal, of course, of America's NATO allies to join in Trump's attack on Iran has placed, as we've seen, a massive strain on that alliance. Again, representing a strategic win for Russia. Well, Stephen Pifer is a former US ambassador to Ukraine. He spent more than 25 years at the US State Department, specialising in relations with the former Soviet Union and Europe. Ambassador Pifer, welcome to Planet America. What would you say at this point has been the biggest impact of the war in Iran on the war in Ukraine?
So the first impact, of course, is that with the war against Iran, that's taken up President Trump's attention. His primary negotiator, Stephen Witkoff, on working on mediating a solution to the Russia-Ukraine war, is also his point person with Iran. So you have had less attention to the mediation effort to find a settlement between Russia and Ukraine. But I actually think that doesn't matter much, because I don't think that mediation effort was going very far. In part because, or in large part, because there was no real indication that the Russians were prepared to negotiate in a serious way. Their position does not seem to have changed at all from the kinds of demands that Vladimir Putin put back in 2004. And Mr. Trump has not been prepared to back his diplomacy with pressure on Moscow to get Moscow to negotiate in a different way.
Ambassador, just how much has the Iran war cost Ukraine in equipment? And can Ukraine survive if America can't spare any more defensive weaponry?
That's, I think, the second impact on Ukraine, which is now with the military operations in the Persian Gulf region, there's a much greater demand, both from U.S. forces, but also from the Gulf states for high-end air defense assets, things like Patriot C-3 missiles, other air defense interceptors to knock down Iranian missiles and Iranian drones. But here, I think actually the Ukrainians have helped come up with a solution. No country in the world has greater experience, greater expertise in defeating Iranian Shahed drones than Ukraine. Ukraine has had to deal with those drones now for 4 years. And over the last year and a half in particular, they've come up with anti-drone interceptors, relatively low cost, maybe $1,000 to $3 a piece. And in Ukraine now, they say they're achieving almost 90% success in knocking down the kinds of Shahed-type drones that the Russians send against Ukraine. And what's been happening over the past 2 weeks is the Ukrainians are now in the Gulf region, sharing their technology, sharing their interceptors with the Gulf states. And part of this, I think, is a Ukrainian hope that if they can give the Gulf states this very low price way to knock down Iranian Shahed drones, then the Gulf states will stop using much more expensive air defense weapons, which the Ukrainians would like to have for intercepting things like Russian ballistic missiles. So I think the Ukrainians are hoping that their help to the Gulf states pays off in reducing some of that pressure for Patriot interceptors and other expensive air defense missiles that Ukraine also needs.
And to what extent has the economic vice on Russia been relieved somewhat now by the relaxation of some sanctions on Russian oil and just the higher price of oil on the international market?
Well, I think this is the third impact that this war has had on Ukraine, and it's probably the most important, is that because of concern on the part of the Trump administration that the price of oil now is going up, and they see it daily in rising gasoline prices at the pump here in the United States, I think that's caused a lot of concern in the White House. And so unwisely, in my view, the Trump administration decided to loosen the sanctions on the export of Russian oil. And I think one calculation was this means that Russia is getting now perhaps $150 million more per day for its oil sales. And a lot of that money funds the Russian budget because the Russian tax structure over a certain price takes most of the revenues that come into Russia. And that's going in part to fund the Russian war machine against Ukraine. So I think that's probably the biggest impact. But again, we've seen in the last couple of weeks, the Ukrainians have found a solution. They now have long-range drones, and they've targeted in very specific ways Russian export terminals. So if you go up to the Leningrad region around St. Petersburg, in the last 10 days, they have been hit multiple times by Ukrainian drones. And I think the estimate now is that Russia has lost about 20% of its oil export capacity. In March, at one point, it was about 40%. So the Ukrainians are basically sanctioning the Russian oil exports in their own way.
Ambassador, are you worried that Putin might trade helping America finish the war in Iran for America helping pressure Ukraine into giving up land like Donbas?
I worry, and this is really almost even separate from the question in Iran right now, but you have seen statements over the past 3 months from Russian officials, including people like Putin's foreign policy advisor and Foreign Minister Lavrov, saying they're talking about the Anchorage understanding. What Russians are implying is that when Trump and Putin met in Anchorage, Alaska, back in August of last year, they reached some kind of a, quote, understanding regarding the Russian-Ukraine war. Now, I think it was wrong. It would be wrong for the United States and Russia to be designing some kind of a settlement over the heads of the Ukrainians without the Ukrainians there. But there was a statement made by President Zelensky of Ukraine where he said, well, the United States is now pushing us to concede to Russia all of Donbass, including surrendering part of Donbass that the Russian military has never occupied. Mr. Zelensky said, and the Americans are telling us that this is a precondition for American security guarantees. The next day, Secretary of State Rubio came out and said that's a lie, and he absolutely denied it. And I hope that the Secretary is correct. I hope that the United States is not pushing the Ukrainians to make that kind of deal, but I'm not totally sure if the Secretary was entirely truthful there.
Ambassador Steve Pifer, thank you for being with us on Planet America.
Thanks very much for having me.
Epic Fury is laser focused. Destroy Iranian offensive missiles, destroy Iranian missile production, destroy their navy and other security infrastructure, and they will never have nuclear weapons. We hope the Iranian people take advantage of this incredible opportunity. This is not a so-called regime change war.
Our objectives are clear. First, we're destroying Iran's missile capabilities. Second, we're annihilating their navy. Third, we're ensuring that the world's #1 sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon. Finally, we're ensuring that the Iranian regime cannot continue to arm, fund, and direct terrorist armies outside of their borders.
Here they are. You should write them down. Number 1, the destruction of their air force. Number 2, the destruction of their navy. Number 3, the severe diminishing of their missile launching capability. And number 4, the destruction of their factories so they can't make more missiles and more drones.
The objectives of Operation Epic Fury are as follows: destroying the Iranian Navy, destroying their ballistic missiles, dismantling their defense industrial infrastructure that produces those weapons, and then, of course, preventing Iran from ever obtaining a nuclear weapon.
Now to the latest firing from the Trump administration, which came as so many have before with a post on social media, although this one was a lot kinder than some.
Pam Bondi is a great American patriot and a loyal friend who faithfully served as my Attorney General over the past year. We love Pam, and she will be transitioning to a much-needed and important new job in the private sector.
Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche is now acting in the role, and it seems as though somebody at the Justice Department was pretty happy to see an end to the Bondi era.
Bondi's portrait has already been taken down, and you see it there, thrown in the garbage.
Pam Bondi was generally seen as a qualified choice to be Trump's chief law officer, having served 2 terms as Florida State Attorney General, but her personal loyalty to the president over the Constitution and her willingness to allow Trump to use the Justice Department to pursue his political enemies somewhat tarnished her reputation.
Former FBI Director James Comey faces federal charges after a grand jury indictment.
A federal grand jury has indicted New York Attorney General Letitia James on 2 fraud-related charges.
A judge has dismissed the cases against former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James.
Those failed indictments did not help Pam Bondi's cause, but arguably she never recovered from these comments less than 3 weeks into the job last year.
The DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen? It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive by President Trump. I'm reviewing that.
Bondi later explained that she meant all files relating to Epstein were on her desk, not a specific client list. She maintained that no such list exists, but for some, that seemed like a cover-up. And when the Department of Justice was compelled by Congress to release the Epstein files, they botched it. Plenty of alleged perpetrators had their identities redacted and protected, while some victims were pictured and named. A competitive appearance before a congressional committee 2 months ago then proved that the Epstein issue really was not going away.
I'm going to answer the question.
Answer my question.
No, I'm going to answer the question the way I want to answer the question.
No,
Your
you're going to answer the
theatrics are
question the way I
ridiculous.
asked it.
You can let her filibuster all day long, but not on our watch. And I told you about that, Attorney General, before you started.
You don't tell me
I did tell you because we saw what you did in the Senate.
Lawyer, not even a lawyer.
Within weeks of that, Trump's war on Iran did make the Epstein issue go away, at least for a time, and under the cover of that conflict, it was also decided that it's time for Pam Bondi to go away as well. Democrats claim that she was the most corrupt Attorney General in history.
She turned the Department of Justice into Donald Trump's vendetta factory.
And one of Pam Bondi's final acts was to accompany the president to a US Supreme Court hearing last week into Trump's attempts to strip birthright citizenship from children born in America to non-citizens or permanent residents. And that was the first time that a sitting American president has personally attended the highest court in the land. It would once have been seen as an unthinkable attack on the court's independence, although it didn't actually help his case.
I think we can all pretty much safely say that President Trump is going to lose another case in the Supreme Court.
Still, Chaz, it was perhaps fitting that until the end, Pam Bondi was happy to pander to the president and enable him to undermine America's justice system.
Oh, it's not the end yet, John. Next week, Pam Bondi's still subpoenaed to testify about the Justice Department's investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. And the Democrats have made very clear if Bondi thinks that her sacking will get her out of the Oversight Committee subpoena, she is very wrong. So there's still some opportunity for more classic Bondi burns, John. Talking about which, while those clips you played before were indeed embarrassing, I reckon the clip that really hurt Bondi was this one.
None of them asked Merrick Garland over the last 4 years one word about Jeffrey Epstein. How ironic is that? You know why? Because Donald Trump, the Dow right now is over. The Dow is over $50,000. I don't know why you're laughing. You're a great stock trader, as I hear, Raskin. The Dow is over 50,000 right now. That's what we should be talking about.
I think I know why they were laughing, Pam, because that moment made Bondi a national joke, and Trump doesn't like being laughed at. Having said that, it does seem that what made Trump angriest was Bondi's failure to win those cases that John mentioned against Trump's political opponents. Some of Trump's buddies blamed Bondi for slow-walking and bungling those cases. Remember Trump's attempted direct message to Bondi last year, I think, saying, "Pam, I've reviewed over 30 statements and posts saying that essentially same old story as last time, all talk, no action, nothing's been done. What about Comey, Adam Shifty Schiff, Letitia James? They're all guilty as hell, but nothing's going to be done. We can't delay any longer. It's killing our reputation and credibility. Justice must be served now." So Trump was kind of obsessed with those prosecutions, and that's a bit unfair on Bondi because it's hard to jail people when they haven't actually broken the law, especially when you run such a dodgy partisan Department of Justice that around 5,500 staffers either quit, were fired or took buyouts. And yes, not all of those were attorneys, but the department only had 10,000 attorneys when Bondi started, so that is a serious brain drain of competent staff for her to use. And let's face it, Bondi did try her best to please Trump. She humiliated herself in cabinet meetings to suck up to him.
Since you have been in office, President Trump, your DOJ agencies have seized more than 22 million fentanyl pills, 3,400 kilos of fentanyl since you've been your last 100 days, which saved, are you ready for this, media? 258 million lives.
She put up adulatory banners of Trump outside the Department of Justice, which, remember, is meant to be independent. Talking about which, this is how Bondi introduced herself to the Department of Justice last year, on day one. Not very independent.
We are so proud to work at the directive of Donald Trump. It is, he will never stop fighting for us, and we will never stop fighting for him and for our country.
You're not meant to work at his directive. And Bondi spent much of the last year trying to please Trump however she could, but it wasn't enough. Even last week, she was still appointing more prosecutors to examine Trump's dubious election fraud claims from 2020. Never enough investigations, John. The thing, though, is the same pressures that applied to her are going to apply to the next person, whoever it is. Bondi wasn't the main issue. Just look at what House Republican Chip Roy wants from the next Attorney General.
We've got to deal with things like Antifa. The president rightly declared them a terrorist organization. We want to see people who are affiliated with these Marxist networks funding Antifa, creating all sorts of danger for the American people. We want them held accountable. We want the people who are harassing J6ers held accountable. We want to know the truth on Arctic frost. We want to see heads roll. Okay. We want to see John Brennan, who the Judiciary Committee referred to the Department of Justice, held accountable, and Jim Comey. Like, these are all things that we think need to happen.
Now that there was everything he asked for. He wants 100% partisan targeting of political opponents or chasing down conspiracy theories. These people don't want a frank and fearless servant of the law, John. They want a hack. And that is why nothing's going to change.
I'm thinking Attorney General Chip Roy might be coming next. That's it for another trip to Planet America. We'll be back at the same time next week and anytime you like on ABC iView, YouTube and Facebook.
And there's an extra Planet Extra Pep podcast tomorrow where we're going to be paying tribute to Pam Bondi's reign of error. See you there.
Bye.